All right. Hey guys, welcome to the Too Complicated for History Episode 1 Recap. Sort of like the after show for our latest episode of Too Complicated for History. I am joined here by the co-host and producer, Lynn Price Robbins, Dr. Lynn Price Robbins, and unclickable link in his wife's Wikipedia page, and producer, Patrick Long. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the intro.
Thanks.
Yeah. I want to get us started right away because this was an incredible episode, and it could potentially be a hot button issue, and I just want to make sure that we kind of talk about our thought process behind it and how we viewed it going into it, so that our audience can get a better understanding, both of our intentions with the episode. It's a good mirror for us to talk about ourselves as a company and all that. So I'm going to get right into it. This one is for Lynn, this first one, and Pat, feel free to answer after her, but I want Lynn to kick us off here. What's our approach, really, in doing an episode that has great historical relevance, but it's also like a current event hot button issue, like American identity?
That's a really good question, Jordan. And I may have a different answer than Pat because as a historian, I see every single historical topic as relevant today. And I think it can all connect in some way to politics and what's going on in our world today. And I think our approach for the episodes is that we're not trying to feed our audience on those connections. So we have an intelligent audience. And we don't need to say, and this is how this relates to today. But our goal is to take primary sources, to tell good history, to, tell stories, hopefully be entertaining, but then for our listeners to walk away thinking about how did those events, impact in history? What was their impact on the individuals in history? But what are the connections to today? And does the topic make me rethink anything today that perhaps expands my view? So we're not trying to change people's views, but we want to give them more context of their history so that when they're looking at a political issue today, they sort of have more to look at, and they can look back and say, well, this is what happened in, the Revolutionary War. How can I learn from that? And how does that impact today? And how is it different from today? So I think our main approach is just to tell good history and then let the audience sort of fill in the rest. And we're hoping that they'll be able to get some good information on today and relevance today, and how they approach the world and politics.
How about you,
Yeah,
Pat?
and
How's it different? Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, so it's different for me in that, like, I'm always looking for topics that I think are going to be compelling to our audience, right? And sometimes that means a topic that forces a conversation rather than provides an answer. And in a lot of media today, it seems like people have very quick, simple answers, and that's not how things are. And so, American identity is something, especially, and that just on a personal note, has been really interesting for me. And I think Isaac even talks about it, in the episode. But I come from a mixed nationality background, right? And so my definition of an American is way different, at least in my experience, than, say you or Lynn. And so our approach to this is, it's kind of the same. We approach it as we would any other show, in the sense of we find these topics really interesting, and just they aren't, look, this is literally the question that creates the show, right? It's like, it's too complicated. There is no definable answer. And so, this is something that we thought would be really exciting and fun to launch the show with, because it would hopefully really engage our audience. We want people to be engaged. We want people to ask these questions and, send in their responses. We will be doing a campaign that's, what is an American to you? And that answer is very different depending on where you live.
Absolutely. And, I actually had another question that I wanted to ask you guys. I'm throwing it totally out of the window because I think you brought up a really good point. So I want the second question to be more reflexive of that. And we talk about how primary sources are a guiding force here, and it allows us to utilize them to talk about this subject matter that could be political charged. I don't think we spend enough time talking about what a primary source really is. I think we throw that out there and hope that people understand, but I think there's so much more significance to it than just the literal translation. I would love to hear from you both about what primary sources are, how we utilize them, and why they're important. Like enough so that we have named our company after it. Lynn, why don't
Well,
we start with you? Yeah.
Lynn?
of course, I love primary sources, and I think the quick definition is it's a source that was created in the era in which we're discussing. So, if we're talking about George Washington's life, it would be letters that he wrote, letters that were written to him, newspaper. So, things that were happening and being recorded at the time. So, for example, in the future, your Facebook post would be considered a primary source because you created it while you were alive. And, we could look at it like you would look at a diary today of, George Washington or someone of a different era. And the reason it's so important is because when you study history, one thing you quickly start to learn is that in each era, the humans who are studying history are sort of coloring it with their own era. So you're almost learning more about the people studying history than you are about history itself. So, for example, if you're talking about, the era, we'll say the 1920s when women get the right to vote, and you're studying an era, the Revolutionary War era, you know, you might focus on, oh, women got to, were able to vote very briefly in New Jersey. You're going to focus on what's important to you as um, as a society at that time. So to see the people who actually lived it and experienced it is really important. But at the same time, they were people just like we're people, which means that they may write to different people differently. So, like your Facebook post may be very different than a way you write, you text your best buddy, which may you don't want anyone else to ever see. People lie.
I think many of the conversations Jordan and I have had across our personal lines of
You don't
communication
want
should
that
not be
going in the
published
written
for
record.
anyone. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's a
Yeah,
rascal.
so it's also, people lie, people tell stories that aren't true, people tell half truths. So it's, yes, we have these fantastic sources, but they're also created by flawed human beings. And so that's part of the fun too, is trying to figure out um, how accurate they are. And you find that by context of more primary sources. So it's all about getting as many perspectives as possible to getting more of a full story of whatever it is we're looking into.
Yeah, we kind of said that in the last episode, which is that history is made up of people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
inevitably, it's complicated as a result of that, and communication is certainly a big part of that. Pat, how about for you?
Sure.
Primary sources.
Yeah, I mean, like Lynn's saying, when I started this journey, it was really interesting to see. I like to say Lynn is like the pit bull of historians, and it's because she aggressively goes into bibliographies and then goes into the source's bibliography and then goes into that source's bibliography and down the ladder and the rabbit hole she goes. And there have been multiple instances in which we're talking about like really popular historical books having dead end sources,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's fascinating to me because that means that it's conjecture, and frankly all of it's conjecture, right? But at least if you have a primary source, you have an interpretation of what you're looking at. When there's no source, you're just playing telephone, right? Like it just happens to be written down on paper, and then you find it later in another book, and then it gets published in another book. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's fascinating to see that history itself, as we perceive it, is so open it's interesting being on this side of the game of telephone. And so that's why primary sources are so important to us, because at least we have something to go off of and not just a hearsay. Um,
An
and yeah,
interpretation. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That
Awesome.
is to say that these primary sources are open for further interpretation down the line
Mm-hmm.
as our understanding of the world changes, which is why history, I guess, is never done.
Well
Um,
put, Jordan. So proud of you.
No, it's not. Yeah.
Not the first time that thought has come up, so appreciate that. All right, this last question is kind of a doozy, but I think it's really important. It came up in the episode, albeit I don't think it was directly stated, but it was a pretty obvious takeaway for me as a listener, not even as an executive producer or anything, just as a listener. Um, the idea that everyone who identifies as an American also has many other identities, right? So you're like a Virginian, or you're also a Yankee, or you're African American, or Asian American, or what have you. It's interesting that other than, well, basically Native Americans, I think actually Lindsay pointed that out, to be an American never actually means you're one particular thing. That's not your only identity. Even at the birth of the nation, she was talking about how that wasn't even our identity, right? We were British Americans or Virginians or whatever. So do you think our country is any different now than it was even then? I mean, it seems we were and always have been a nation of immigrants. I mean, Lynn
Yeah.
or Pat? Yeah, Pat.
Yeah. I mean, I'll hop in here
Yeah.
as, descendants of immigrants, or a descendant of immigrants. Um, Look, yes, I think today we are still struggling with the identity of what we are, um, just as a cohesive unit. But that's also not entirely surprising to me in a country that is over 330, probably closer to like 350, maybe even higher, 330 million people in a country, right? What is the unifying thing that makes them all one people? And I guess at this current point, it's geolocation, right?
Mhm.
Um, but as far as culture and local culture and just perspectives, I mean, everything's so different. And as someone that's lived on the East Coast, the West Coast, and now in Texas, I think Lindsay said literally those same places in the episode.
Mhm.
They might as well be different countries, and it's the truth. And that's not even talking about living in a city versus living in a rural or a suburban area. Um, it's it's so complex, and everyone. I mean, I think part of it too comes down to like how wrapped up in your identity, right? Is where you are from. So there's different there's I mean, that's just one perspective, right? So the idea of like having national pride, I mean, is that even something that you care about, because again, a lot of people talk about the history of their lineage. Some people don't have the luxury of knowing their lineage, right? um Whereas some of us, Isaac has a really funny story when his dad did 23andMe. It was like a Jason Bourne movie where and the satellite kept getting closer and closer until it was like the county that, or the town that his dad was from for generations before they immigrated to America. So, that's a long way of saying, yes, I do think we're still struggling to know what our national identity is. Um, and, that kind of stems from a much more annoying philosophical question, which is what is identity? And we don't need to go down that rabbit hole right now.
Well,
My wife
I
hates that question because I always pull that up before. She hates, but it's funny.
Well, we all know that I'm terrible with my sports metaphors. So for you guys and for the audience at large, give me some grace here. But it got me thinking about how we identify with our sports teams, right? I'm from
Mhm.
Philly. We love the Eagles. As of this recording, we're going to the Super Bowl, and who knows how we're going to do. But the players constantly are changing. They're getting traded and new ones are getting traded. And we just love the Eagles. It's not really about the people. It does seem to, I mean, even that is a geolocation based thing in that they are a Philadelphia based team and the people are a little less relevant. And so it's, I just find that interesting. It's like the ship of, what is it? The ship of, help me out here, Lynn.
Yeah, some Greek
Onesimus?
name.
No, not Onesimus.
It's
The ship
not,
of,
and it's not Onesimus. No, that's different. It's like Pericles or something to that effect. But as are you referring to the boat as you remove each piece of wood
yes.
that's fully replaced? Yeah,
The
yeah,
ship
yeah.
of
That, by the way, that is the exact
Theseus.
Theseus. Is that who it is? Okay,
It's
that's the
Theseus.
exact metaphor I was talking about that my wife hates. She's like, "This is
Oh.
a dumb question. It's his boat. It doesn't matter."
Right. Well,
Um,
hopefully we can edit that to sound a little better.
I mean,
Leave it
that's
in.
fine.
Leave it
I
in.
was going to leave it in. Yeah, for sure. I was going to leave that
Great.
moment
Perfect. Including that. Leave that in too. And this.
in. And we'll just leave it all in.
We'll leave it all in. But
Leave it
so,
in.
but I do think that, again, the point still being valid that, it's weird that still as of this time, and even in that time, it was a geolocation, right? Because you were the British, but you were located in the Americas. So you were British America. And then when you became Americans, you were just basically saying, we're those people that now self identify as just Americans, as this new thing. You as a person hadn't even changed. You have just as of that moment changed your identity as of 1776.
Sure.
You were the same thing on July 3rd as you were on July 4th or 5th, whatever. So anyway, Lynn, please, as our expert, can you fill us in on the history side of it?
Well, it's more to add to what you gentlemen said that I really liked Lindsay's response to that question, which is that to be an American is to be in the constant state of improvement and trying to be better than we were before. And I mean, that started with the very beginning, the creation of our nation. The question was, what are we going to be? And everyone who had different opinions, agrarian, industrial, they all thought it was the best for the nation. And there's sort of this goal for all of us to just continue to improve and be better than the era before us. And in that way, I think that can be a pretty distinct form of identity while also allowing for many other identities to be accepted and appreciated while you can still be a proud American. Because if you subscribe to this idea of improvement, and I think the improvement also goes back to the ideals of the revolution, the ideals of liberty and freedom and of being a free nation, whatever that means, because it's going to mean something different to everyone. But we're all striving for this goal to be better, and you can easily have other identities, local, sports, national, and still consider yourself a proud American because you're still sort of reaching for that goal, which may not be attainable, but the closer you can get, the better off we all are. And I think that very much applies to politics, is that in the end, everybody is today, just like they were, when the nation was created, is they're striving for the best version of the people and the nation as possible. We all have different definitions of what that means. And so, we're all fighting for improvement and for what we see as better things. And so I think that can be that ideal and that goal and that push is a really important part of the American identity, is that goal to improve. And it allows for many other identities as well, but it's one that we can all sort of take together and say, no matter where you're from, if you have that goal of bettering yourself and bettering the nation, then you're an American.
Yeah, and
Well,
hopefully, the intention is always that, right? And it
Right.
makes it a little easier to empathize with people who have differing values or beliefs than you, as long as you know that the intention is for the betterment.
Right.
Hopefully without the detriment to anyone else, right?
Right.
Like that's really what it comes down to. And thanks for restating that, Lynn, because I forgot about like how powerful that was when she said it in the episode. And it's so awesome. And yeah, I mean, shoot, that's kind of why we talk about these things, because we're trying to improve that, and that's our intention.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know if we have time for one more question, but if not, we'll cut it out. But you guys we keep talking about the founding fathers, and I think in people's minds, I'm just going to speak for myself. In my mind, we think about them hundreds of years ago, and maybe they were more noble than us, or they had these grand ideas. They were of this grand importance, or they had this better understanding of the world than we do. Or some people might argue the exact opposite. What did they know? It was so long ago. But I've come to learn that I don't think people were any different, but certainly biologically or evolutionarily, I don't think they were any different in the 18th century than they were today. And it sounds like from our research and from what we've been doing and their primary sources, their actual writings, that they struggled and with the exact same things that we are, and they were made up of very similar people with on a polar opposite sides of the fence as we are today. Is that accurate? Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. I think it's dangerous to put them on a pedestal, because then you're acting as though everything they did was with the best intentions and was wonderfully accurate and correct and for the betterment of everyone. And that's simply not true. They were flawed human beings just like we are today. And if we look at it that way, then it's more reasonable to say, we could do great things too. You don't have to be this statuesque, brilliant figure of a founding father to do something really great. And one of the things that Thomas Jefferson did that just goes to show that he didn't subscribe to his era being very special is he wanted the laws of the nation to change every 20 years so that one generation didn't have to live under the laws of another generation. So he's literally saying, just because, my generation thinks you shouldn't do this, well, it's up to the next generation to decide whether or not they should. So clearly he believed in improvement and in changing, and had, no belief that everything they did right then and there was perfect and none of it should be changed. And, I think that's really important for us to know and to understand, that we can do great things today too, but we can also learn from them and learn from mistakes and successes from any era in American history.
And improve upon them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Almost when you say it like that, it seems silly that we're still following a document that's 250 years old to the T.
That's what he would say.
Yeah.
Well, and what's funny about that is we're not actually following it to the T, right? Like, we're following interpretations of it. Mm-hmm. People today are interpreting that document, and we are going based off that. And by the way, we Lynn, do we have a source of TJ saying that? I would love.
Oh, I can find one. Absolutely.
Yeah, we're gonna put that in the link in our show.
Yeah.
Just because we are not hearsay people.
That's right.
Right.
I'll find the letter.
We're playing telephone, but this was the note that was given to us.
Right.
And the other thing is, it's about being adaptable, right? You need to be able to change and at the right times not change, right? Because if it's always changing, it'll just be chaos and anarchy. And so it's just been an interesting journey, learning really cool things about George Washington. Like, he was a really nerdy farmer. Like, he was so detail oriented and so focused on that. He didn't even want to be president at times. And yet he was still he's the founding father of our country, right? A guy that didn't want it is literally a monument everywhere. And
it's ironic.
It is ironic. I mean, to a certain extent. He also there were things he definitely wanted. Lynn, please feel free to step in if I'm misquoting or saying anything wrong. It's just they were people, and we're people, so it's going to be chunky and gross at times. But the hope is, that we just persevere and keep going, and hopefully it's better for the people that follow.
Yeah, well, to
And
bring it around full. Go ahead, Lynn.
I'm sorry. I was going to say that's a fantastic. Just the people are people are people, and people. I mean, we love reality TV, right? Even if we, will lie and say we don't. People like to look in on other people's lives. They like to look at their drama. Well, history can be the same exact thing. We're looking into people's drama, into their lives, into their romances. And it's interesting because, we're all at the core, we're all just people, and we're all just, interested in snooping in on others' lives and history.
And just to that, I'm going to plug a future episode. Stay tuned for our episode with Dr. Cassandra Good and Founding Friendships. Really interesting conversation. Not sure the exact release date yet, but it is coming up.
Love that. Well, I'm going to bring this around full circle and close this out here because, we're talking about people and made up of people and interpreting interpretations of the Constitution and how, it's subject to the individual's interpretation or the current government's interpretation. And what's so fascinating about that is bringing it back to politics. It's kind of nice that we have multiple parties, right? Because it allows us, like it did then, now it allows us to have the continued conversation of that interpretation. If everyone agreed, then it is what it is. It could never change and grow. So it's nice, I will say, in the end, that we have disagreement. It allows us to have discourse. It allows us to ultimately find something that's for the people, of the people, by the people. So great, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. You can listen to the first episode of Too Complicated for History wherever you get your podcast with Dr. Lindsay Travinsky. Fantastic episode. Coming up on February 7th, we have our next episode with Mike Duncan. You got to check it out. And we'll be back with another episode of whatever we're calling this show after that episode. So, guys, thanks for tuning in. And please do me a favor, subscribe, download, listen, tell your friends to tell their friends, listen to it on mute. Get the word out there. Thanks for joining us.
Listen on mute. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, man.